Welcome. Thank you for joining us for First Person Conversations with Holocaust Survivors. My name is Bill Benson. I have hosted the museum's First Person program since it began in 2000. Thank you for joining us today. Through these monthly conversations, we bring you firsthand accounts of survival of the Holocaust. Each of our first person guests serves as a volunteer at the museum. We are honored to have Holocaust survivor Esther Starobin share her individual personal account of the Holocaust with us. Esther, thank you so much for agreeing to be our first person today.
Thank you for inviting me. I am happy to share my story and my family's story today.
Esther, you have a lot to share with us today in a short period, so we'll start. You were born in Germany in 1937, several years after the Nazi Party took control of the country. Although you were too young to remember your life in Germany, please begin by giving us a sense of your hometown of Adelsheim and your family.
I will. Adelsheim, first of all, is a very small place. And my father's family had lived in that area for over 200 years. My father had been in the First World War and had lost a leg in the First World War. So when he married and came back, he was selling grain. Now, my parents had first lived in Korb, which was another small place not far away, and had moved to Adelsheim when the Jewish community in Korb was no longer. So they moved to Adelsheim. And as I said, my father sold grain. And in February of 1937, my father was taken to court because somebody claimed he had arranged the trade of a bad cow. When he went to court, the judge called him Jew Rosenfeld, and he, of course, lost the case because by then businesses were being taken away from Jewish people. So he had to pay for the cow, pay the court costs, and he lost his business. And that was in February. I was born in April.
We have a picture of your family to take a look at here. Tell us who's who.
Okay, I'm the baby, of course, sitting on my mother's lap. And my brother Herman, who was 4 years older than I, then my older sister Bertel, my sister Edie, my dad, and my sister Ruth. And as I said, my three sisters had been sent away to school by 1938. Herman and I were still at home with my parents.
Tell us what the age range was of your sisters. I believe your sister Bertel was the oldest, of course.
Yes, my sister Bertel was the oldest and consequently the bossiest.
Yeah.
And then
and 12 years your senior, I think, right?
She was.
Yeah.
Yes. And Ruth, my sister that was on the end, was the middle child, and she always acted like a middle child.
And as a former school teacher, you probably know all too well what that behavior is.
Right. She had to know everything and tell you everything. Right. Yes.
Esther, just a year and a half after you were born, on November 9th through 10th, 1938, a wave of pogroms or violent attacks took place against the Jewish population in Germany. These events became known as Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass, because of the shattered glass on the streets after the vandalism and destruction of Jewish-owned businesses, as we see here in this picture, synagogues and homes. Tell us what the impact of Kristallnacht was on you and your family.
Well,
and here we see a synagogue burning on the night of Kristallnacht.
My sisters, as I said, were in Aachen, and they had walked to school the next morning and saw the synagogue burning, and they were told to go home.
In this next picture, Esther, we see the after effects of the burning of the synagogue in Aachen, and this would have been the synagogue that your sisters would have seen.
Yes, from what I've found out by doing some reading, this was the only synagogue in Aachen, and it was quite old and a well-established synagogue. But this is what my sisters would have seen on their way home. I don't know how close they actually got. They didn't really talk about it other than to tell me they were told to go home. They didn't talk a lot about their experiences.
Following the events of Kristallnacht, your parents, along with many other German Jews, were convinced that life under the Nazis had become intolerable and could get worse. This led your parents to make the very difficult decision to send their daughters on a Kindertransport to England in 1939. Tell us about the Kindertransports and what you know about how it's possible for you and your sisters to leave Germany in this way.
Yes, in England, the Jewish community and some of the other religious communities went to Parliament and asked if they could rescue Jewish children from the Nazis. And Parliament agreed to that. So the rules were that the kids had to travel alone, and there was a £50 fee so that they could be sent away from England once the war was over, because they didn't want them to stay and take jobs away from English people.
Mm-hmm.
And then some people from England went to Germany to help organize, and the Jewish community in Germany organized. What I don't know is how specifically my parents got us, my sisters and I, on the Kindertransport. My three sisters, Bertel, Edith, and Ruth, left from Aachen. They didn't get to say goodbye to our parents. I mean, I've only heard a couple of stories about it. Bertel used to say her ears were pierced the night before because there was an old wives' tale that her eyes would be perfect if she had her ears pierced. Mm. And they were. She never wore glasses. And Edie just talked about once they left Germany, they were given some food through the window of the train. But they didn't actually talk about what happened specifically. And
about their journey as well. And none of that, yeah.
When they got to England, my Aunt Hannah, my mother's sister, had gone to England earlier and worked as a maid, since that was one of the jobs available. So she knew a lot of people in the London area and found homes for my three sisters. Bertel lived with a family that had a place in Scotland, and they went up to Scotland. And then when she was 16, she came back to Aunt Hannah's to work and that. And at some point after she was back, the police came to the door and they said, "Do you know this man?" And Bertel said, "I have no idea who it is." And it turned out it was her foster father, who'd been working as a spy while he was up in Scotland.
This is amazing. This is amazing. Just so everybody understands. So the family that she found refuge in Scotland turns out to be spying for the Germans. And as you said to me in the past, what better disguise to hide your spying than to bring in a Jewish refugee into your home?
Absolutely.
A little child.
Yeah. And Edie lived with a family in London. And then when the bombing started and children were evacuated from London, she lived with another family in the country, this time with a Jewish family. And she always said they treated her meanly and all that. And when she was 18, she joined the Women's Army, the ATS.
And you'll have more to say a little bit about that perhaps later when we get to that.
Yeah. And Ruth lived with a doctor and his family in England, in London. And then she also was evacuated to a family, and then eventually was sent to a hostel, a place for youth who had no home. She said it was because she didn't do the Hebrew lessons that Bloomsbury House sent for her to do, but I don't really know if that's why. Our family wasn't big about talking about all this stuff, actually. Mm-hmm. So they were all in England. They went in March of 1939.
So with your sisters having gone to England on the Kindertransport in March of 1939, in June of 1939, just 3 months later, you arrived safely in London on a Kindertransport, as well as your sisters had done several months earlier. What happened once you got to England?
Well, I was placed by Quaker ladies, and once I got to London, I was taken by train by Mrs. Eddington, a Quaker woman from Norwich, and she sent a letter to the Harrisons and asked which was the family that I was going to go and live with. Mm-hmm. Originally, I was supposed to go to Wales, but that fell through. And Uncle Harry, Mr. Harrison, worked in a shoe factory owned by a Jewish man who put a sign up on the bulletin board, "Will anyone take one of these children?" And the Harrisons said they would take one of these children. So I came off the bulletin board, actually.
That's amazing. And what we're seeing right now, Esther, if you don't mind me jumping in here, this is what? Tell us.
This is the tag that I wore on my trip. You notice that it says Esther Sarah. Sarah was a name that was affixed to all Jewish women and girls by the Nazis to yet one more way to separate us from the rest of the world and the rest of the Germans. It has my name, my birthday, my number, and I don't really know what the last thing is supposed to be on there.
And you actually had this attached to you, so folks knew who you were.
Yes, and my foster mother, Auntie Dot, did save this. So the Harrisons were very fundamentalist Christians. They belonged to a chapel. They didn't go to Church of England. And I went to live with them. They have one son, Alan, who's 7 years older than I. He's exactly the same age as my sister, Ruth. And I went to live with them. When I first got there, I had scarlet fever, and I was in isolation. And Alan used to play with me through the window. I was very much afraid of Uncle Harry, which was very interesting because he was a very mild-mannered man. I never heard him yell. So whatever I was afraid of had to be something that had happened in Adelsheim. And that. So Auntie Dot got the name and address of my mother in Germany, and she wrote to my mother. And my mother answered her, and I would like to share the letter that...
Oh, we'd very much like you to do that. So what you're going to share is a letter that your mother wrote to Dot Harrison, your foster mother in Norwich.
Yes, and luckily Auntie Dot saved everything. If you were in their house, you knew they saved everything. And she gave me this letter and a few other things when I went to visit.
Okay.
So, dear Mrs. Harrison, thank you so much for your kind letter and the postcard of the young lady. Now we are much more reassured as we know that our little Esther is better, and we do hope that she will be soon all right again. I can realize that it's not easy for you until Esther is accustomed to you, as the little girl clung to her mother so very much, though she is not spoiled at all. Conditions here were such that she couldn't go to anybody else. Esther is a merry child, loves playing with other children. I hope her sisters will be able to come and see her and fetch some clothes. I am so glad that Esther likes your son, and by God's keep, she will soon become accustomed to you. It will also take a little time till she's lost her homesickness. We suffer from that too. But it is more difficult for the little one as she cannot make herself understood. Be patient and she will get over it. The great thing is that she keeps well, for we are devoted to her. May God keep her well in a strange land. We had to part because she wished for the good of our children and believe that only the hope of seeing them again makes me strong and helps us to overcome. Now I thank you and the young lady who was so kind as to translate our letter. I have written to her. I would have written to her too, but lost her address. Once again, many thanks for the love and kindness and care that Esther enjoys with you, and a kiss for our darling. Yours gratefully, Kati Rosenfeld.
Thank you, Esther, for sharing that. That is an extraordinarily powerful, poignant letter, a letter filled with love and caring and very little about what must have been going on for your parents and what they were feeling and experiencing back in Germany. As a mother yourself, I know you have, what have you thought about what that must have been like for parents to make that decision?
I can't imagine what it was like. I thought about it when my two daughters were 2, 3, and when my grandkids were that age. You want your children to survive, but the thought of them surviving without you and you not being with them to guide them is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
To be able to do that. And I think it shows such strength. But the other thing that this letter shows is my mother's true belief in God.
Mm-hmm.
How, when what was happening to them, they could be like that, have that belief and that. So the thing that also surprises me when we're talking about me going on the kinder transport, why didn't they send Herman? He was 6 years old. We don't know. We have no way of knowing. I mean, the only thing that we can speculate, he had been sent away to school, not all the way to Aachen. He was in Heilbronn, which isn't so far away.
Mm-hmm.
But when the opportunity came up for them to put the kids on the Kindertransport, maybe Herman wasn't around, because the Jewish community, from what I gather, really arranged these things. But I haven't been able to find this out.
You remained with the Harrison family, of course, throughout the war. In fact, you were there until after the war. Tell us what you remember about your life with the Harrisons. Of course, as you said, when you first arrived, you recall that you felt afraid of Mr. Harrison, but of course, that turned out to not be long-lived, apparently. So tell us about this photo, and then tell us more about what your life was like with them.
Well, first of all, I got there in June and the war started in September. So we had to carry gas masks. There was bombing, so we went into a raid shelter. I don't ever remember being hungry. Auntie Dot was a terrific manager, and they had a garden in the backyard. We also had chickens, which disappeared at some point, and Alan and I disagree. I said the rats got them. Alan intimates we ate them. One or the other.
One or the other.
One of them. I was very happy there. They really spoiled me, and I was definitely part of their family. I, of course, knew they weren't my parents when I was old enough to be aware of that, because I was calling them Auntie Dot and Uncle Harry.
Right.
They were very involved in the chapel. The chapel had community activities back then. They were very community oriented, so there were things there. There were other children that I was friendly with. I loved school. When I left, I was just at the point of taking the 11th plus exam, which would have decided what kind of further education I would have had. And Alan was a terrific big brother. He let me follow him around. He didn't care that I was there. He wasn't jealous that he got this little sister to usurp his place in the family.
As you said, Esther, by the time you left, you were studying for that next level of education, but your whole education up to that point had been in English schools.
Right.
And so you got a good grounding. Do you remember being in school in England?
Not really. I mean, Alan and I have had big discussions about how we learn to read, but basically we said we can't remember not knowing how to read.
Right.
So I don't know if we learned before we went to school or not. I don't remember school per se at all.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I remember there were other girls in our neighborhood that I would walk to school with, and I was pretty good in school, I think, from what Alan and the Harrisons have told.
I have a hunch you were more than just pretty good in school. Esther, during that time, during the war years, while you were out there with the Harrisons and your sisters were obviously in different places, were you able to see your sisters during that period at all?
They did come to visit. I think it was mostly after the war. This is a picture of one time when Bertel and Edie were visiting. As Alan in his school blazer, Edie is right behind him and Bertel there. Sometimes Ruth came, and we could go on the river there, go rowing, and that. And Auntie Dot and Uncle Harry were very welcoming. And for Alan, not only did he get a little sister, he got a whole bunch of sisters, which were
four sisters.
Pretty exciting for him, I think.
Wow.
And the Harrisons didn't drink, they didn't dance, they didn't go to movies. Now, I don't know how much of the not going to movies would be economic reasons or not. I had never been to a movie before I came to this country. But it was a happy time for me. I mean, there was an American Air Force base nearby, so there was a lot of activity as far as things, airplanes flying and that. But I didn't remember a time when that hadn't been until after the war. And I was pretty protected. I don't remember hearing news on the radio or reading the papers. And clearly they got papers and they listened to the radio, but I don't remember that. And I don't know if it's kind of to protect me from knowing it, but I don't really remember.
Yeah. Esther, as you explained, with you and your sisters being sent to England on the Kindertransport, and the fact that your brother remained behind, what do you know about the conditions that your parents and Herman faced while they remained in Germany at that time?
Well, Herman was home from school in October of 1941 for Shavuos, and it was pretty normal for actions against the Jews to happen on Jewish holidays.
By the Nazis. The Nazis would do these actions on Jewish holidays.
So in the whole of Baden, all the Jews were told to assemble, in each village to a different place, each town. They could take one suitcase, and they were told to bring enough supplies for a 3-day travel. So they did do this, and they went by truck to a train, and then they were on a train for 3 days. The way I know this, that Reinhard arranged a commemoration of that date, and somebody who had been on the transport and survived wrote a letter talking about how it went. So they went to Gurs, which was a camp in France. It had been a political camp. This is Gurs.
That's Gurs, and just rows and rows and rows and rows of barracks.
It was very overcrowded. There was a lot of disease and people dying from disease, not enough food, not enough clothing. And my parents and Herman were there. And one of my aunts was there too. And they worked in the kitchen. Now, my father's leg hadn't been sent with him. And the mayor of Adelsheim wrote to the company that made his leg, so they had to send him another leg, which to me is amazing. They're sending these people to this awful place, and they want to make sure they have their legs so they can work. And apparently my father got sick and landed up in the dispensary for a while. But while they were in Gurs, there was an organization in France, OSE, that took the children out of the camps, and they took them to chateaus and places. They fed them, they taught them. In fact, on Herman's immigration thing for the ship, it said he knew French. We were wondering how he knew French, but he was in this place. And then in 1941, they managed to bring 1,000 children to the United States, and he came to the United States. This is a picture of him waiting to get on the ship in Lisbon. He's the little boy with his head turned.
So there we have a circle on him. Yeah.
Yeah. So when the historians at the United States Holocaust Museum were looking for information to develop the exhibit what the Americans knew, they found this picture.
And that was just a few years ago.
Yes, we never knew this, and we didn't know exactly, because Herman, whether he remembered or not, I don't know, but he would never talk about what happened to him.
Esther, you shared that extraordinary letter that your mother had written to Dot Harrison. While your parents were in Gurs, and they were actually in a couple of different camps, did you or your sisters hear from your parents while they were in the camps?
Yeah, Bertel and Hannah got letters from our parents. In the 80s, when there was a lot of information about the Holocaust, Bertel said, "Oh, I've got some letters." And she actually had 5 letters, and my husband had them translated. And it's really all I know, truthfully, about my mother. My father wrote a couple of lines underneath, but my mother wrote. And it was really interesting. She told Bertel in one letter, make sure your siblings thank the people who are taking care of them, study hard, wash behind their ears, all the things mothers say. There was no way Bertel could do that.
Right.
We were all in different places. She also asked Bertel to write to her family in the United States to see if there was any way they could help them get out of Germany, to send money. And in fact, Bertel was sending them money. Mm-hmm. In the letters, my mother knew, and of course my father, that Herman was in the United States. I mean, in one letter, she mentions he's in the OSE home. And then in another letter that he's living with Sally, and that, Hans is treating him like a little brother. So they did know that. Mm-hmm. And the thing that A couple of things amaze me about these letters. One, how much parenting she's trying to do in these letters from the camps. And then the belief in God, it stayed. I mean, by the last letter Bertel had kept, they knew they were not going to get away. But there's still this belief that God, family, friends, and people would take care of us. I mean, such belief when such terrible things were happening to them. I find it hard to understand. I'm not sure it's that I don't understand it. I just
marvel.
They were pretty amazing people.
Yeah. What happened to your mom and dad?
Okay, they were sent in August 1942 via Drancy, which was a transit camp outside of Paris, to Auschwitz. And then they were murdered upon their arrival, August 14th, 1942. And Bertel knew they were gone when she got the letter back. I don't know if the money was still in it, but she got a letter back that she had sent to them.
Oh, it was a return letter. Yeah.
It was returned, yeah. And we know the exact date and which transport they were on because there's French people have written this book, and there's a list of every transport, who was on it, what their names were, where they came from, their birth dates, and that information. So that I don't remember how Bertel originally got that book, but that's how we really know for sure.
So as your parents were sent by train to Auschwitz, they had the knowledge that their 5 children were safely in other countries.
They did.
They did know that. Esther, in 1947, the war's been over since May, in Europe it's been over since May of 1945, so you're there for a couple more years. In 1947, however, arrangements were made for you and your sisters to come to the United States, but the Harrison family wished that you would be able to remain with them. Please share with us the letter that your uncle wrote to Mrs. Harrison in response to her request to allow you to remain living with them in England.
Okay, and this is my uncle that Herman was living with.
Okay.
Who had actually also lived in Adelsheim, but they had emigrated in before I was born, but that year they had come to the United States. So July 12th, 1947. Dear Mrs. Harrison, after considerable time, we have come to realize, no doubt, how close you have come to my niece, Esther. We know that she has by this time made you consider your responsibility to Esther as your own. We are greatly indebted to you for all you have done for her, and hope there will always be time in her life to write you and keep you informed as to her progress in this country. As you no doubt realize, it is our desire for us to have them all together and to raise all of the children as brothers and sisters should be raised. I want to say again, we are appreciative of all things you have done for her. Sincerely, Sally Rosenfeld. And that actually, we never lived together in this country. My brother continued to live with the Sallys until he went into the Army. I lived with Bertel and Edith and Ruth for a little while, with an uncle, and then with Bertel and Edith when they had an apartment.
Esther, what do you know about the impact of your leaving the Harrisons, what the impact was on the family, Alan and his mom and dad?
From what Alan has told me, it was the worst day in their life. Alan told me his mother's hair turned gray overnight. Well, I don't think that's exactly true because they clearly knew that I was going to be leaving. And I probably did if I thought about it, but I wasn't a questioning child. But in June of that year, I had signed, it wasn't exactly a passport, it was some kind of a travel document. And I must have known I was going to travel if I signed that. And also, the last time I went to visit Auntie Dot, she gave me a picture of me in London, a real touristy picture with a beefeater.
With a beefeater, yeah.
Yeah. And I never looked on the back, but I did a year or so ago. And on the back, it says, we're in London to see if there's a space available for Esther to leave. But it was easier not to acknowledge that I was going to be leaving because I didn't want to go. I wanted to stay there. I was happy there. It was my family at that point.
Do you remember actually leaving their home and to make your way to the United States?
Well, I don't know how much I remember and how much has been told to me. Okay. But the Harrisons, like many families, didn't have a telephone. So Bertel called the police, and the police came around and knocked on the door and told them they had to take me to London the next day because I was going to be leaving with Bertel. Ruth had gone the week before. Bloomsbury House, the organization that looked after us, had made these arrangements. So they took me, Alan and Auntie Dot took me to London. Uncle Harry couldn't take the day off work. And it was a day Alan was supposed to get a special award from school, but he went with us and they handed me over a package again. And I went with Bertel to the ship. And we were traveling on the Queen Mary, which had been a troop ship, so it wasn't luxurious at that point. And somebody from the royal family was traveling that time. And in England, they are very clever about when they do strikes. So there was a strike for a couple of days. And luckily, Bertel had a boyfriend who was a butcher. So he'd given her a salami. My aunt had sent bread, and they gave children milk. So we were okay.
You had something to eat. Yeah.
You should always take food when you're traveling. You never know what's going to happen.
Did you stay in touch with the Harrison family?
I did. My sisters were very wise. They made me write letters. I would say I wrote regularly, but I probably didn't. And I got to go to college here, which would not have happened in Germany. And I went the summer after I graduated, I went and spent the summer with Aunt Hannah and visited the Harrisons at that time. But I've always been in contact, and they've definitely been part of my life.
Tell us just a little bit more about your transition. You've come to the United States. You are reunited with all of your siblings, including Herman. Of course, you spoke the King's English by this time. And what was that transition like for you? What was it like to go to school here after your British education?
Well, I first went to an elementary school, and it was a really small school. There was 6A, 6B, and 5B, and with one teacher. And she made fun of some of the words I used because they were different. As an adult, I realized she probably didn't like immigrants. It probably wasn't personal as I took it at that time. But when I went to junior high, I wanted to take Latin. You took a language. My uncle said Spanish. And I thought for years it was because the Spanish teacher was cute. But I really think it was because the Spanish teacher was Jewish. And there were two other Jewish kids in the same grade as me. And she took us under her wing. She was a mentor before mentoring was popular. Mm-hmm. That was very useful. Now, my sisters and I lived with my aunt and uncle until Bertel and Edith had jobs. Ruth went off to college. And so I went to 2 junior highs and 2 high schools. So it was a lot of different schools. The second high school I went to, the German teacher loved everything about Germany. That was really hard.
Oh, I can only imagine.
Yes. I didn't do well in that class. But as far as transition, I mean, in Norwich, we didn't actually live in Norwich when I lived with them. They lived in Thorpe, which was a rural place. So we were living, when I first came here, on North Capitol Street, a major street in Washington, D.C. When we had streetcars, there was a streetcar outside. So I went from rural to urban, from Christianity to Judaism, to living with this peaceful, quiet family, to this loud, raucous house. There was my aunt, her mother, 2 cousins, my uncle, another refugee family, and my sisters. My uncle had it temporary through furniture around. My aunt was mentally ill. It was not a very good place to be.
So you indeed had a lot of transitions that you went through. You sure did. I have one more question to ask of you. Before I do, I think we have just one more image. It's just such a nice photograph. And this is you and Alan, right?
This is Alan and I. I'm wearing a dress that one of my aunts made that's now in the museum.
Ah. Okay.
And that, I mean, it was such a happy time. I mean, it was really the happiest time of my childhood, which is odd to say you're living in a foster family during a war, but it really was.
So my last question, Esther, for you is, in the face of rising global anti-Semitism and the news from Auschwitz-Birkenau, it just adds to that. Please tell us why you continue to share your firsthand account of what you experienced during the Holocaust.
I think it's easy to read a number or to read about it happening to a group, but I think to know what happened to individual people and how it's impacted their family, and it does, it impacts your family, it impacts everyone. And I think it's really important to know that. And the other thing that I think it's important to know that you need to pay attention to what's going on in your country, in your neighborhood, and what you can do to make things, I would say, better, but I don't even think that's quite it, to make things so they work for everyone, to try and understand and help people not feel for them that there has to be an other. We're all people. And I think it's so important that we pay attention to what's going on. We can't live in that's the common word now, is a bubble, which may be fine, but bubbles collide with other bubbles, and not everybody's bubble is fine. So I think for me, knowing how important other people's kindness, even when there was such evilness in the world, that there is evilness and there is goodness going on at all times, and do what we can to try to get rid of the evilness and improve the goodness, if that makes sense.
Makes total sense. Esther, thank you so much for being willing to share this hour with us, to share what you and your family went through. I especially think your final words are just so important for us to close out on. And your image of living in a bubble, but bubbles colliding with each other, is exceptionally powerful. So thank you, Esther, so much for doing this.
Thank you for inviting me.